All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. Really excited for today's virtual field trip. The last few months, we've been really lucky to get to visit the Human Origins exhibit at the Perot Museum in Texas. So this exhibit is called Origins, Fossils from the Cradle of Humankind. So if you're not familiar with this, there was a discovery not too long ago in the Rising Star Cave System in South Africa of over 1,500 fossil elements of one of our human ancestors. So in September 2015, they were identified as belonging to a previously unknown early human relative, and it was named Homo Naledi. So we're always excited when we get this little peek at the exhibit. These fossils are being exhibited for the first time in North America. So normally in South America, but for this, or sorry, South Africa, but for this short period of time, they're on exhibit here in North America. So these are amazing pieces of human history. And we're always so excited to have Becca join us. And she was one of the first underground astronauts in this cave system excavating these fossil elements when they were first found. So Becca, it's always great to have you joining us live from the museum. We're excited to get to know the exhibit a little better and of course, a little bit about you too.
Hi, thanks for having me. Greetings from Texas, everybody. I'm in Dallas, Texas at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science, and I am in the Origins Fossils from the Cradle of Humankind exhibit. And the computer right now is sitting on a case that has fossils in it, so I'm gonna tip the screen down just a little so you can see those bones. Those bones that you're looking at are 2 million years old. They're not casts or replicas. Those bones that you see on your screen are the real 2 million year old bones. And they belong to a species that we call Australopithecus Sediba. And Sediba was discovered in 2008 by a 9-year-old boy. Can you imagine? His dad happens to be a prominent paleoanthropologist, so they were out exploring, looking for fossils. And Matthew, who was 9 at the time, found a rock with a bone sticking out of it. And he called his dad over and showed him the bone. And it started this whole series of cool discoveries that help us understand where we as humans came from and what our most ancient relatives look like. And so I can show you, if we slide up here, we can get a better look. Let's see, there you go. You can see the skull here and then the collarbone over here. And those are the first pieces of Australopithecus Sediba that were discovered. And this individual that we have here in the Perot Museum, he's visiting us from South Africa, and he's never been allowed outside of South Africa before to be on display because fossils like these are so rare and that we try to keep them very well protected. And we had to go through lots of special permissions in order to get them here in Texas so that people on this side of the planet could have a look at the real things. Let's see. This individual of Australopithecus Sediba, turns out that he's a kid. He's still growing, or he was when he was alive. He was still growing, and we can see that in his bones. Most of you, I'm looking at the classrooms trying to guess how old you might be. Most of you, I guess, are somewhere between the ages of 9 and 14. Is that about right? Yeah, cool. And that's just about the same age that Sediba was when he died. And it's pretty interesting because his bones look a lot like yours do right now, in that your bones are still growing, and so your growth plates aren't fully fused, and your bones that, like your femur, is still in a couple of pieces, and Sediba's femur is also still in a couple of pieces. And as he grows and grows, and as you grow and grow into an adult, those pieces will fuse together. So you have one solid femur, one solid thigh bone, for example. Happens in your other bones as well. So that's a pretty cool way that we can look at modern humans, people like us living today, and our skeletons, and compare them to these skeletons that are 2 million years old to be able to understand what life was like 2 million years ago and who was walking around on the planet. Now, probably if you think of fossils, you might be thinking of dinosaur fossils that are stuck in rocks and the bones themselves have been fully mineralized and turned into rocks. And that's the case with Australopithecus Sediba. And hopefully the glare is not too bad, and you can see this giant rock behind me that has lots of bones sticking out of it. We can get the light a little better for you. And this is what Sediba looks like when we find him. He's just a big chunk of rock, And if we x-ray that rock or put it through a CT scanner, we can see the bones inside the rock. And then our team knows where to go with our tiny, tiny little jackhammers to get the rock away so we can expose the bones and study them. I can give you a peek of what we think Sediba might have looked like in life, because, you know, the bones are one thing, but what did they look like when they had muscle and skin on them? And this right here she is, this one, that is what we think an adult female Australopithecus Sediba would look like. So let's see if I can do this. Here we are. I'm pretty short, but Sediba's even shorter than me. You can see we're standing right next to each other. But you can tell that she's standing upright just like we do. She would walk on two legs just like us. But you might notice that her arms look pretty long relative to ours. And so we think that she was also still spending lots of time in the trees, climbing well in the trees and hanging out in the trees sometimes, but coming down onto the ground to also walk around and you know, find food and do other things like that. And we've got a little bit of a sad story about how we found how Sediba ended up as a fossil, because again, if we look at his bones, we can tell that he fell down a hole, and that's how he died. It's pretty straightforward. There was a big hole in the ground from a cave, and Sediba and some other animals all fell into that hole at different times, and that's how they died. And we can tell because we can see the breaks in their bones that were not so good, not such a good day for them. But it helps us that both Sediba and those other animals fell into the hole, because then we can see what kind of other animals were on the landscape 2 million years ago. And we can know that there were large cats called Dinophilis that are sort of like saber-toothed cats with big teeth sticking down in the front that probably might have not been so nice for Sediba to run into. But there were also all kinds of different antelope and some smaller animals as well that look a little bit like the kind of animals we see in South Africa today, but also look somewhat different. So these fossils are 2 million years old, and they were found encased in rock at a cave that was all eroded away now, 2 million years later. But in 2013, Matthew's dad, Lee Berger, the paleoanthropologist, decided he needed to explore some other places, and he found this cave called Rising Star Cave. And a couple of cavers went down inside, and they saw what they thought were some bones inside Rising Star. And Lee was a bit too big to get into this tiny cave. So he put out a post on Facebook asking for anthropologists and archaeologists who knew how to cave and climb if they would be willing to come and work in this cave to find some fossils. And to me, that sounded like pretty much a dream job. I'm an archaeologist, and I love to be outdoors. I love to go rock climbing and caving and hiking and all of those things. So I raised my hand and I applied for the job, and much to my surprise, I got it. So I got to go and excavate some fossils. I think that Joe might have a video of what it looks like in the cave.
Yeah, absolutely. So Becca, do you want to set them up a little bit just with, like a little walkthrough of the commute? Because it's not like a normal commute that you would take to work. If you want to maybe just share a little bit about the cave, and then I'll play the video so they can see just how wild it is to get in there.
Yeah, so this cave, if you look across the landscape, if you stand outside Rising Star Cave, you would see a big tree. And underneath that tree is a hole in the ground that we walk through. But that's the easy part, because the further and further we get into this cave, the smaller and smaller it gets. So if you're in the classroom, raise your hand if you've been inside a cave. Anybody been inside a cave? A few people have. So you know that it's really dark, and there might be stalactites and stalagmites in the cave, those cave formations that hang down or come up from the ground. We've got those in Rising Star Cave. We also have lots of boulders and lots of really solid walls that don't move when you bump into them. So as we walk through this cave to get down to where the fossils are, first there's a hallway, and we have to turn sideways to slide through the hallway. And then there's a thing called the Superman crawl, where we have to get down on our bellies and some people have to put one hand above their head and crawl through this low tunnel that's about 10 inches high. So 20 odd centimeters high. And that lasts for 3 or 4 body lengths, and you're crawling on your belly in this dark tunnel. And then you stand up and you have to put on a harness and rock climb in the dark up this fin of rock we call the dragon's back. And then after all of that, you get to the really fun part, which we call the chute. And it's a narrow fissure in the rock that's about 18 centimeters or 7.5 inches wide. It's a little bit wider than a dollar bill if you have a US dollar. And we have to climb down through that. It's pretty small. It's, let's see, probably it's smaller than the space under the rungs on your chairs, between the rungs of your chairs and the ground. It's a pretty tight place, but we can do it. We just rock climb down through there, and you have to learn at which point you need to turn your head sideways so your head with your helmet on can get down through that narrow gap. But let me tell you, I think that it's way better than sitting in traffic to get to work or to school. Much rather be doing that.
All right. Well, let me share my screen here. I want the students to get to see this now. So let me just pop on the share screen, make sure I pick the right screen. All right, this one will work. All right, so you should see my screen now, and I'm going to take it full screen.
I was the first scientist to go into the cave once the actual remains had been discovered. I looked down and thought, oh, really? I may perhaps have bitten off more than I can chew. But, you know, at the same time, the excitement of what we were about to do overwhelmed that fear. And yeah, I'm perfectly prepared to shove myself where I don't belong. I got this job by answering a Facebook ad.
I put a call out on Facebook saying, I need skinny scientists. We're not claustrophobic in a dangerous and difficult environment.
And so I applied thinking, well, you know, give it a shot. A couple of days later, I got the email saying, you know, you're in.
God, this place is beautiful.
You're just pushing into somewhere entirely new. And I can imagine that's how the astronauts felt when they were going out into space for the first time. You just thought, no one else has done this. And, you know, Lee's grand plan, the whole team's grand plan, if there had been a serious accident deep in the cave, was that we would have had to send a medical team to them, and they would have had to live underground until they could get themselves back out again.
Critical issues, no one panic.
All right, so I'm going to stop that there. I think that gives classrooms a pretty good idea of how tight things are. Let's see if I can come back from my screen share. And so, you know, that's very much the process that you went through. Is the screen share done?
Exactly. Yeah. I work really closely with Marina. In fact, here she is in the exhibit. Let's see, there's a life-size one right over here. There's Marina. That's who you just saw talking on the video. And we work really closely together. We're an excavation team, and we go underground and we use tools like, well, so I said that Sediba, we have to use these tiny little jackhammers to get the bones out of the rock. But for the fossils we excavate in Rising Star Cave, we use tools like these. So those are porcupine quills and tiny plastic spoons and toothpicks and paintbrushes. We use really fine tools to move the dirt away from the fossils so that we don't damage them. You can see some of our other equipment over there, harnesses and helmets and Tupperware containers, just like you might put your leftover lunch in. That's how we carry the bones out of the cave, so that they're in a hard-sided thing, so we don't damage them as we carry them out. And of course, some flags, let's see if we can see the flags, to mark where we find the fossils so that nobody steps on them in the dark while we're busy working around. We actually have a mock-up of the cave in the exhibit. Let's see if we can get in here and be able to see. That's pretty much how tight it is. If you can see the wall of the cave here and the wall of the cave here, it's pretty squishy in there. Whoop, there we go. But it's really fun to be able to go down inside this cave and see these bones that nobody has seen in 300,000 years, and be able to bring them up to the surface so that scientists can study them and learn about another species of our ancient human relatives, And these ones in this cave are called Homo Naledi. So I'm gonna wander through a little maze of cave here in the exhibit with some pictures of what the cave looks like. And we're still going. It's a long ways. It takes us about 20 minutes if we don't have anything in our hands to get from the surface down underground, 30 meters underground, into the cave system where we find the fossils. If we have something in our hands, if we're carrying stuff, it can take us 2.5 hours to get back up to the surface, depending on what we're carrying, because these fossils are so delicate and we're trying to squeeze them through narrow areas. So these bones, in this case, these are the Homo Naledi fossils, and they are about 300,000 years old. And these bones that you see here, you can see this skeleton is a partial skeleton. One of the reasons it's partial is because we have a scholar here who is studying these bones, and he's hopefully he'll come in just a few minutes to talk to you. So we've taken some of the bones off display and put them in the lab. But here's my buddy Homo Naledi. This is what we think Homo Naledi would have looked like, that skeleton I just showed you. This is what we think he would have looked like in life. So he's standing just a few inches on a platform. So he's just about the same height I am. And he kind of looks like us, in that he can stand upright and walk. He wasn't spending so much time in the trees as Sediba, but he was still a pretty good climber. Now, in the artist's reconstruction, to be honest, we have no idea what Homo Naledi's hairstyle would have been like. He didn't leave us a selfie, but we're pretty happy as scientists from reading his bones to know that this is what his body would have looked like. This is how muscular he would have been and how he might have stood. So some of this is the artist's interpretation, but most of it is based on the science. Let's see. And then we'll just go into the room where you can see what this part of South Africa looks like, and then we'll open it up for some questions. Does that sound okay? Yeah, sounds good. You know, it really is an amazing story, from the finding of the fossils in the first place to, you know, now they're here and on display for a little bit in North America. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, so here I am sitting in South Africa. These pictures behind me are what the Cradle of Humankind, what this area where these fossils are found looks like today. And it's a really beautiful area. It's a dry season when these pictures were taken. That's why it's not so green. But if you could have X-ray vision and look underneath all those hills behind me, it would look like Swiss cheese. There's loads and loads and loads of caves that are just waiting for people to explore them and find more fossils. All right, well, Becca, I think it's time we meet some of our classrooms. What do you think? Great, sounds terrific. So I do want to give just a quick shout out, because I know there are some classrooms tuning in on YouTube. I want to give a shout out to Mrs. Sagru's 5th graders. They're in Illinois. So use the chat sidebar, send us in a question or two, and we'll make sure we work it in. But let's meet one of our camera classrooms to get things started. So we're gonna go to Leamington, Ontario. We've got some 4th graders hanging out with Mrs. Reeb. Let me get that microphone turned on. There it is. How are we doing, Leamington? Yep.
Hi. Go ahead. I got a question. How is on our bones that still have our skin on it? Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Like when we're dead, on our bones still has our skin on it?
Do our bones still have our skin on?
I think she's curious, when you find the bones, is it just the bones or is there anything else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we find the bones, do they still have skin on? No, they don't still have skin on anymore. The bones are able to preserve because there's lots of minerals in our bones, but the skin doesn't usually last for 2 million years. So the skin goes away and all we have left are the bones. And we can make some good guesses and some good hypotheses about what the skin and the muscles would look like by looking at carefully at the bones to see what the animal looked like in life.
All right, let's see. Let's go to Brampton, Ontario. So Canada, some 5th graders hanging out with Mrs. Huxley. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, 5th graders?
Hey. Right here.
What do you eat when you're hungry inside the cave?
What do we eat when we're hungry inside the cave? We try not to eat too much inside the cave because we don't want to contaminate it. Sometimes we will bring dried fruit or some granola bars. Usually, we almost always have a bottle of water. Well, we always have a bottle of water with us. And really that's about it. One time somebody brought a tuna fish sandwich into the cave for lunch, and that was a very, very bad idea. It smelled terrible in the small, tight space without a whole lot of airflow of the cave. So we don't allow tuna fish sandwiches underground, just stuff that doesn't smell too much.
All right. I think that's good advice for any situation, is see how closed the space is and then decide if tuna fish is a good choice for lunch. All right. Very cool. We're going to jump now. We're going to visit a class in the United States. We have Mrs. Delgado's group hanging out with us in Miami, Florida. Let me get their microphone turned on. There it is. How we doing, Miami?
Okay, what was the time period of developing the whole human skeleton? And
What was the time period of developing the human skeleton?
Yeah, like how long did it take? How much time did it take from the time you found the first fossil to get the entire skeleton up above the earth?
Yeah. So the first fossils were found in 2013. And for Homo Naledi in the Rising Star Cave, we found the first ones in 2013 in like September. And by the end of November, we had excavation started at the beginning of November. By the end of November, we'd excavated 1,500 fossils, which is a lot. That's a lot of pieces of bone. And then it took several more months before the team was able to sort of sort them out and make them into a skeleton. And then 2 years later, we were able to publish it after the research had all gone through peer review, right? All the other scientists agreed that, yeah, we had what we thought we had. So it took a couple of years. The excavations themselves on the individual bones, that varies. Sometimes the bones are sitting on the surface and we can pick them up really easily after we take a lot of photographs and draw them and do the documentation. But sometimes if the bones are buried or if they have other bones laying on top of it, it can take us days and days to excavate individual bones because we have to really move the dirt away almost grain by grain. And it just takes a long time and a lot of patience.
Yeah. And then I think I'm right with my number that of those first 1,500 fossil elements, I think there were 18 individuals.
Yeah, I think we're up to 18. We're a little bit more than 18 now. Yeah. Yep. So we have, it's not just that it's one skeleton, we have lots of skeletons sort of a little bit mixed up, and it takes some time to sort out whose femur belongs to whose hand. And sometimes we can do that, and sometimes it's not possible to do that.
Yeah. And I think it's important, Becca, to kind of put perspectives for the students that in this field, you know, the finding of a single tooth can be a huge deal.
Yeah. So in 3 weeks in November of 2013, we found more fossils than had been found in South Africa in the previous 80 years. And that's not because people weren't looking. People were out looking for fossils every day. But these are so rare that you have to hunt for years and years usually to find a single one. And we just happened to find a spot where there were lots of them.
All right.
Really cool.
Very cool. So we're going to jump to our next classroom now and make sure I pick the right microphone. So we have 8th grader students from Centro and Educativo Renacimiento from the Yucatan joining us. We're super excited to have them joining us. How are we doing, 8th graders?
Well, hello. We have 3 questions. The first is, how do you know that you aren't broken the bones?
How do we know that we haven't broken the bones?
Yes.
Yeah. So with the Homo Naledi fossils, on the inside of the bones, it's really white and chalky. And on the outside of the bones that have been sitting in the cave undisturbed, it's brown and looks like a bone. So when we see places that are white and chalky, then that's a bone that's been broken really recently. That's a good question. We also are very careful not to step on them.
All right, why don't you guys fire away with your next one?
What's your weirdest experience in a cave?
My weirdest experience in the cave. Ooh. So we have bats in our cave, as one does, and the bats don't normally go as far back into the cave as we go. We see them dangling from the ceiling, you know, holding on with their little toes. They're very adorable. We see them as we go into the cave, and every once in a while they'll fly into the cave where we are. And, you know, they can tell where we are way better than we can tell where they are. Even with our headlamps on, we can't see them. And I think my weirdest experience was feeling the air from a bat's wings on my cheek as the bat flew by. And I had no idea he was coming. And I have to admit, I squealed a bit.
All right, we're going to come back to our 8th graders in just a minute, but I want to jump to a question from our group in Illinois tuning online. They're wondering, Becca, about some of the other landscapes that you, as an archaeologist, have excavated in the past.
Yeah. So I'm an archaeologist, and I often work on sites that are, you know, 250, 300 or so years old. And this site is 300,000 years old. And some of the sites I work on when I'm working above ground are places like the Great Dismal Swamp in Southern Virginia, where I study sites where maroons or runaway slaves, African Americans who were resisting slavery, lived deep in this swamp. And those are a really neat place. I've worked on really, well, for the US anyway, they're old colonial homesteads that date to the early 1600s. And those places are pretty neat. And I've also worked on some indigenous American sites, some Native American villages that date back to 1,000 or 1,500 years old. And a lot of those these days are found under cornfields in Maryland. So I've spent some time in cornfields and I've spent some time in caves.
All right, very cool. So we're going to go back to Leamington and see if they have another question for us.
We're having all Canada announcements right now. Can you give us like 2 minutes?
All right, we'll come back. Thought I saw everybody standing up, so they must be doing perfect. All right, let us jump back to, oops, there we go, Mrs. Huxley's class in Brampton, see if they have another question for us.
Okay. Just ask it. Right here.
How many miles long was the cave?
How many miles long was the cave?
Okay.
The cave is, so the cave looks like a big knot of spaghetti if you look at it from above. And each strand of spaghetti is a passage in the cave. So let's see, the part of the cave that we spend most of our time in, if you added all of those passages up, it's about 350 meters worth of passages. And that doesn't sound like so much, but when it's dark and when those passages are this wide, it seems like quite a lot. The whole cave system is a couple of kilometers, I think, worth of caves. So a mile or so worth of passages.
All right. Let's see. Let's go back to Miami and see if they have another question for us.
So hi, this is Mrs. Weiss. I'm working with Ms. Delgado. Thank you so much for sharing. Our question is there a specific reason why there are so many bones in this cave? Have you been able to figure out why the person died there?
Yeah. So we've found as many as 18 or 20 individuals of Homo Naledi underground in this cave system. And it's a big question. How did they get there? And were they alive when they got there? Or did they die once they got in the cave? And what we've been able to tell from studying the bones carefully is that they were already dead when they got into the cave. So they didn't die in the cave. They were already dead when they arrived there. And our hypothesis is that Homo Naledi were taking their dead into the cave on purpose, that it was sort of like a burial ground, but we're careful not to say burial because we don't know what they were thinking. We think it was a deliberate place to place their dead. Now, was that because they thought it was a special place and that's where they wanted their dead to go? Or was it because the dead ones were stinky and they needed to get them out of the way? We don't know the answer to that, but it certainly looks like the Homo Naledi were going through an awful lot of effort to take their dead fellows down into this cave, which is pretty cool. It shows, some people might think that shows that they're thinking big thoughts and that they're potentially even caring for one another, which is a nice thing to see.
Yeah, and I think Another piece of evidence I think you've talked about in the past is, the lack of any other bones there from other animals. So it kind of leads to believe that if just that one kind of grouping is there, that is a pretty good hypothesis.
Yeah, for the Sediba fossils, those 2 million-year-old ones I showed you first, we've got Sediba and lots of other animals, and we know that there's lots of ways into that cave. But for Rising Star, we have Homo Naledi and we have part of an owl, and that is all we have underground in that chamber. So that's an unusual situation not to have found other animals that wandered in.
All right, let's take another trip back to our grade 8. Let me see. All right, I heard you guys have a third question for us.
Like, do you only found like humans' past bones, or also like dinosaur bones or animal bones, like that?
Yeah. Have I ever found other things besides human bones? In my excavations as an archaeologist, I have never found any dinosaur bones. The paleontologists do that, and they look in slightly different places because of how the geology works. But I have found bones of other animals, and usually those other animals have turned out to have been dinner for the humans that we're studying. So we'll find the chopped up bones from sheep or goats or cattle and things like that the humans are eating, the deer or whatever that the humans are eating. But that's about it. Yeah.
All right, so our classroom in Illinois sent us another question via YouTube, and they're wondering about the Rising Star cave system. Was it called that prior to the excavation? Did you guys get to name it? What's the significance of that cave system in South Africa?
Yeah, so the Rising Star cave system was sorry, somebody's just coming in to join us. The Rising Star cave system was called Rising Star for about 50 years before these fossils were found. It was a cave that if you wanted to try out caving, you could call up the local caving club and say, take me somewhere, and they'd take you into this cave, a different part of the cave from where we find the fossils, but into this cave anyway. So it already had that name, and it's called Rising Star because there's one chamber in this cave that has all these tiny stalactites on the ceiling. And when you shine your headlamp on them, they sparkle like stars in the sky. So hence Rising Star. And then we actually named the species Homo Naledi after the cave because Naledi means star in the Chute language, which is one of the languages that's spoken in that part of South Africa. Come on over, Miguel. So he's just walked in. Might have to squat down. I have with me a visiting scholar from the University of Washington. This is Miguel Ochoa. He's studying paleoanthropology for his PhD. And he's looking at some of the Homo Naledi bones this week. And Miguel, do you want to say just a bit about what you do?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm looking right now at measuring the fragments of bones on the arm and the leg of Homo Naledi so we can estimate the full length of the bone so that we can estimate like accurate stature and see how the morphology varies within this species.
All right, very cool. Miguel, we have classrooms joining us in Canada today, in the United States, and we also have a group of 8th graders in the Yucatan joining us.
Oh, nice.
So that's really cool to have you joining with us today. How long are you at the museum? How long will you be working?
I will be working on these fossils today, all day today, and I think early bit tomorrow morning before I fly out.
All right, very well. We caught you just at the right time then. All right. Well, I know we need to visit Mrs. Reeves' class again, and then maybe we'll visit our 8th graders one more time, see if they have a question. So Mrs. Reeves, I'm going to turn your microphone on. I think the announcements are over. Oops.
Are there any hydrogen peroxide in the bones?
Is there any hydrogen peroxide in the bones?
Yes.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, but we do use, so you know how hydrogen peroxide sort of fizzes if you put it on the right kind of a rock or something, of a substance? Have you seen that? So we have done some tests with something like hydrogen peroxide underground to test whether we're looking at a flowstone, so the natural cave formation, or we're looking at a fossil. because let me get this right. The flowstone will fizzle when you put the peroxide on it, and the bone won't. Is that right? Yes, that's right. So it's a way that we can just use a drop of something like hydrogen peroxide to test whether a little tiny fragment is a natural rock or whether it's a part of the bone.
All right. So not something there naturally, but a tool that you do use from time to time on the excavation. Very cool. Let's jump back to our 8th graders in the Yucatan and see if they have any questions. Maybe they have a question for our visiting scholar. Who knows? Let's let me see here. There we go. Microphone is on. Did you ask what you have to study?
I'm sorry, I could not hear.
Sorry, I'm having trouble too. Can you come a little closer for us? Nice and loud.
How many years do you have to study to be a paleontologist?
Ah, okay. So they're wondering about the education. How many years did both of you have to study to be able to do what you're doing?
So I have my PhD. I went to university for my bachelor's degree, and then I worked for a long time, and then I went back to university and I did a master's degree in 2 years and my PhD in 3 years. So it was 5 years to get my PhD so I could become an archaeologist.
And I did my 4 years in evolutionary biology, and I'm finishing up my master's right now and in the PhD program. So I still have about 4 years left. So altogether, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So far, it's been 6 years, but I still have like 3 or 4 years left. Yeah.
All right. So a commitment to education, but when you're doing something you love, it's probably pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. Very cool. Well, look, classrooms, I'll just do one more pass through. If you have any more questions, give me a wave and we'll come back to your classroom. Other than that, we might let our crew at the museum get back to business, but I think I see in Leamington, they have one more question. Someone just ran up to the camera. So let's turn that microphone on. Can you try that one more time? Huh, that's really funny. The microphone's on, but we can't hear you. Let me try and unmute it and mute it again on my side, see if that makes a difference. Okay, try again. Mrs. Reeves, do you want to try and type me that question? We want to get it. Oh, I hear you now.
Oh, okay. Try it again.
Okay.
True that bones, inside of bones, there's this gas called synovial fluid, and it comes out and releases inside of your body when you crack your bones.
Neither of us are experts in that area, so I'm afraid we're not the right people to answer that question. We work with a lot of different people who have specialties in everything from how bones decompose to what the bone's shape is to how do you excavate the bones to what are the rocks like. And I'm afraid that is outside my expertise.
Outside of mine too.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up is that, you know, on a team, not everybody specialize in the same areas. There's different people who specialize in different things on a team, and that's what makes things work. But any fluid that would be inside of a bone when it did break, by the time you guys are finding it would be long gone. Yeah. Very cool question. Someone's definitely doing some research in Leamington. And then I think there's one more question online that's worth jumping into, and they're wondering what would happen if the fossils, like the Naledi fossils, got wet as you were taking them out? Would that be an issue at all?
Yeah, it's 99% humidity in the cave when we find the bones. So we try to protect them from getting any more wet. They're sort of damp when we find them. We try to protect them from getting any more wet or any more damage, hence putting them in those Tupperware containers. And then when we get them up to the surface, we let them dry very, very slowly so they don't crack as they're drying. And then sometimes we submerge them in another liquid called paraloid that helps stabilize the bones. And the paraloid sucks into all of the little gaps and holes in the bone to make the bone really stable. So we try not to run them underwater. We clean them with just a brush. but they are pretty wet, pretty damp when we find them.
All right. Well, Becca, thank you for another awesome session from the exhibit. It's great to hear that so many people are still coming in weekend after weekend, week after week to check out the fossils while they're there. And Miguel, thank you so much for jumping in and saying hi. And I hope the rest of your research goes well before you head out.
Thank you.
All right. Well, the last thing we'll do, I'm going to turn the microphones on, boys and girls. Just want to say a quick goodbye and thank you.
Goodbye, thank you. Goodbye, thanks.
Go ahead, boys and girls.
Bye, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks everyone for hanging out today. Great to have classrooms from all across North America. And Becca, we look forward to our next event from the exhibit. Thank you so much again from Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.